Everyone.
Okay, so, well, welcome one and all. This is I think, a first ever in the nation panel. I don't mean to be arrogant about it, I just am not aware of any other where we have mixed Vietnam veterans who never lost the battle, but history said we lost the war, and Afghanistan veterans who never lost the battle. And my book didn't lose the war, but, politically, it was decided to leave. So how the hell do we feel about that? In our case, how do we feel about it more than 50 years later? In the case of my colleagues here, who are sitting adjacent to me, how the hell do you feel about it since you just left? And so I'm going to go through and introduce. Let me start by introducing Ben Cunningham of Texas. He and I were in the Mekong Delta in 1969. Ben, say hi. Can you hear me? Well, nobody can hear me.
No, you can hear me.
I can hear you, Laurie.
Oh, you can? Okay. So, Ben, just wanted to acknowledge you. I'm going to start with the Afghanistan veterans here in terms of real narration. We have Pete Dodge, who is down in Atlanta. Say hi, Pete.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're on mute. Pete, you're on mute.
And
He needs to unmute.
Pete volunteered as a medic for Vietnam, was trained at Fort Sam Houston, and was sent to Thailand. His father had been a physician in Korea, so in Thailand, Pete medically condemned a pallet of steaks and a pallet of beer and became the hero to the base. Good job, Pete. It's good, important to have value. Gentlemen, Major, please introduce yourself and.
We got the camera right
Oh, you got a camera, okay.
Camera's right
there.
there.
So I'm
Good.
Major Dan McGee. I'm still an active duty officer. Been to Afghanistan 3 times. My first was with the 506, 4th Brigade, 101st, where I was a platoon leader the entire time, either a heavy weapons platoon leader or a mortar platoon leader halfway through the deployment. And then my second 2 deployments, my second and third deployment rather, was with the 2nd Ranger Battalion as a targeting team commander and company commander.
I'm Seth Tilton. I actually just got out of the Army in January of this year. I was a sergeant. I deployed twice with the 82nd Airborne, 2nd Battalion, 508th, 4th Brigade in 2012, and then 2013 into 2014.
So you jumped out of perfectly good airplanes?
Unfortunately, I did, yes, sir.
Okay. I'll try to set a tonality for this. We're feeling our way because, as I say, nobody else has mixed the two groups before. When we came back, we came back to a very hostile environment. We were told to dress in civilian clothes because they'd throw food at us in the airport. There was no parade, there was no celebration. If it came up in a job interview, you might not get the job because you've been to Vietnam. Although in Michigan, veterans were actually shown preference, and that was my experience. But we didn't talk about it for 30 years. For 30 years, no one said thank you for your service, and for the 30 years, we didn't bring it up. And whatever we thought about it when we first left, and these guys will chime in, our minds changed considerably from our first take to now. And you guys are our heroes. I will say this. I'll put this in context. The typical World War II combatant saw 40 days in combat. A day in combat is a day where you don't know whether you're going to live or die. 40 days in combat. We Vietnam veterans, and I was in combat, saw 180 days of combat. But you guys, my God, count them up. At 360, I've talked to one guy who was in 1,000 days of combat. The stress of that is unbelievable to me. And I'm just in awe that you're just sitting here and both of you looking fairly sane.
It's all under the surface.
Do you, I don't know if you want to make any comment to that. I haven't really asked a question. It's just that it's such an intense experience, I really almost can't imagine it.
I mean, yes, it is. Being over there was very intense, but As I'm sure you know, is it's all about who you're with, and you're doing it for the guys to your left and your right. So
Yes.
my focus my entire time there, while I was a company commander and while I was a platoon leader, was how are my guys doing? What am I doing to make sure that they are as safe as they can be as we're accomplishing the mission? And that honestly, it takes your mind off of your own personal safety and puts your mind on how am I maintaining the safety of my men so we can accomplish the mission. And that really kept me sane.
Right.
I think it's pretty much the same for me. I mean, obviously I wasn't an officer, so I don't know that perspective, but I know the group of friends that I had over there and I made over there, they made that was the best. Like, they kept us sane, you know, everybody made sure we were all safe and everything like that.
I'll say something that I want you guys who are remote to chime in. Before we got to Vietnam, the Army was really composed of draftees from low-income neighborhoods, families, and so forth. I was at the first wave of college-educated guys. I had graduated from college. My company was made up of, and I was a specialist fifth class, which you don't have anymore, but an E5. My company was made up of guys from badass neighborhoods and Ivy League athletic fields. We'd been educated in factories and we'd been educated in college. And the upshot was we were an interdisciplinary team, highly creative. Once we learned to work together and bounce ideas off one another. And this was really important for us because the company I joined had been essentially wiped out before we got there. We were all replacements. And 6 weeks later, the enemy tried to do it again, and in half an hour we killed them all. But really because of this creative blend ideas, hey, let's do this. They've never seen this before. They had been studying us, so they thought they knew all our tactics. We hit them with something they'd never seen before. So that was my experience. Ben, or you want to comment at all?
Well, yeah. My experience was I was in college at the time, and didn't really expect to ever go to Vietnam, at least so long as I was in college. But I was about 2 years into college and got really, really sick over Christmas break one time and had to missed about 4 or 5 weeks of classes in the spring semester. So I decided to just withdraw and then jump back in the summer school. And little did I know that, I don't know about all universities, but I know that the University of Houston, which was where I was at the time, apparently every time somebody of draft age, a male of draft age, withdrew from classes, they notified the federal government. And within 2 weeks, I got a letter from Lyndon Baines Johnson, basically saying, "Hey, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel here. It's your turn. Come on in." And so that was kind of how. And it wasn't until after I got back from Vietnam. I spent a number of tours in Vietnam, and in most of the campaigns between 1969 and 72 or 71, I think. So I was just happy to try to get back into school, but I had gotten so enmeshed in what was going on in Vietnam, both from a combat position and also when I went back over to teach and work with an NGO over there, that it took me quite a while to finally finish up college after Vietnam collapsed. It wasn't until like 77 when I finally was able to graduate from my undergraduate time. But yeah, it was a strange time.
And Pete, you volunteered. You didn't even have to go because you had served with Vista, and therefore you were exempt from military service. Yet you volunteered.
Yes. Well, my story, very briefly, is that uh, as an undergraduate in a small liberal arts college in the East, I was busy filling out my law school applications. And virtually all my classmates either went to medical school or law school, and we were all draft exempt and would be draft exempt, for the indefinite future. And that bothered me. So I wrote an op-ed for the school newspaper, and I said, what we're really doing here is we're taking advantage of a cannon fodder class theory. We've had all the opportunities. This was what Donald Trump would call an elite school. Okay, we've all had all the opportunities that America can give us, and we're going to just keep taking those opportunities. And the people who never had any opportunities are fighting the war. And but having signed that op-ed piece, I realized that what I was in effect going to do was enlist in the Army. But I thought I would do a year in the Domestic Peace Corps first. And of course, in Appalachia, the young men I was working with were getting picked off in the draft. And these guys had never really had a chance in life. So when I enlisted, they stopped thinking of me in the community as a draft dodger, but they thought I was crazy. If I didn't have to go, why was I going? And I said, well, I need to do this. And I'm fourth generation US Army. So, and I went, and one of the best decisions I made in my life.
Wow. So I would have had difficulty talking about Vietnam in the first few years I was back. And I don't mean to put you guys on the spot, but I just want to open this up. First off, is there anything you would want a general American audience to know about your experience over there or your service?
To be completely frank, I would say about my service over there, and I can't speak to your service, but the things that I did over there and the things that me and my men did over there was nation building, because I didn't get to Afghanistan until 2013 was my first tour there. And I know if you talk to many veterans, their experiences and what they did and what their mission set was is vastly different as the war went on over the 20 years. So in 2013, what I was mainly doing was running combat patrols, really to protect the nation building that at this time they were called SFATs. So we were running combat patrols to protect the SFATs to help train the Afghan army to become a sustainable force. And then later on in my service, when I went with the 2nd Ranger Battalion, I did something completely different as a part of a joint task force. So that the two experiences were extremely different. And if you all have talked to many people that have been to Afghanistan multiple times, they'll tell you that every deployment is wildly different in what the mission set was. And really, my experience over there, and I'll reiterate it, was keeping my men safe so we could accomplish the mission that we were handed. And talking about it, like I lost friends over there. I've been to a lot of memorial services for people that I was with, and it gets hard to think about what we were doing over there and where it is now. And I'll pass it off to you.
So my first one in 2012, it was a bit different. It was a very different experience for me. It was more combat patrols every day. We were doing left seat, right seats with the National Army, because it was at the time, they were supposed to be doing everything. So we would do that, then we would patrol at nighttime and then watch guard. And then when I went back in 2013, that one was a big shell shock for me, because honestly, we didn't do any of that. We just guarded high-ranking civilians. They had to go to a factory to talk to some local Afghanistan people. We went with them. To the other base. It was just things like that. And that one was a completely different shock from the first one.
We tried a sort of cruder form of nation building. We were trying to do in Vietnam what we had done in Korea, which was to divide the country in half and turn the lower half into an industrialized democracy. So we were, my company would go out and work with the villages. They inoculated against lots of diseases in the Mekong Delta. So lots of inoculations. We dug deep water, clean wells, build hospitals and schools, and fixed roads. And we employed the locals all through our big base camps at very high wages. They, and I have to credit them for this, used that as an opportunity to spy on us. So they were learning everything about us. They wanted us out. They just wanted us out. And once we were out, they wanted to do business with us. And so they pushed very hard to become favored nation trading status, and we gave it to them. And today, Vietnam is a retirement community for Americans. It's beautiful. Americans are very welcome. It's very inexpensive, and the food is just terrific. It's just terrific. So they were just determined not to have us control them in any way, shape, or form. They thought we were basically doing colonialism. Mm-hmm. We thought we were stemming monolithic communism, the spread of monolithic communism. Such a total misunderstanding of one side by the other, there was no way we could really do business. Right. And, I don't know, you guys want to add to that, Ben? Any comment?
Yeah, I hear lots of similarities between Daniel and Seth. My first year in Vietnam was kind of sneak and creep and intelligence. But my second year over there, I was a MACV advisor, Military Systems Command advisor to South Vietnamese combat and ranger troops. And that was a part of the time where the big push was Vietnamization. And what we were trying to do was to get the South Vietnamese military up to a level where it could take care of itself, because everybody knew that the handwriting was on the wall that the troops were going to be withdrawn at some point sooner or later. Nobody knew the exact date then, but it was all headed in that direction. And actually, and of course, you know, I thought being a military advisor might get me out of some combat situations, but obviously I had to be with some of these units when they were found themselves engaged in combat. And it was, boy, these guys need a lot more discipline and a lot more help than I'm able to give them right now. But yeah, that's how I spent my second year in Vietnam.
So Ben, you've shared a good story with me when you were representing MACV, and you were a Spec 5 as I was.
Yeah.
But when you were interacting with the Vietnamese Army, their officers, you were always one rank higher than they were. With
Yeah.
MACV's approval. And one day you were a general, right?
For a day. Yeah. Yeah. The way it was set up was in order to have some, control over those folks that I was working with, and all in the arena I was working in. That was the rule for whoever the highest. You were one rank higher than whoever the highest ranking Vietnamese person was. I mean, if they were a sergeant, you'd be a lieutenant. If there was a lieutenant, you'd be a captain, and blah blah blah. And then one day, in one of these operations, there was one guy who was a colonel, and actually there were a few times when there were colonels, but it didn't really come up. I mean, everybody knew the drill, but there was one day when for a day I wound up being out in the boonies as a general. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good gig for a 21-year-old.
Yeah. So how are your peers? How are the guys? Are you in touch with the guys that you were over there with? And generally, how are they doing? Are they good? Are they okay? Is it mixed?
So I keep in contact with all my guys, okay. Well, as much as I can.
Yeah.
With my fellow officers, I'm very close with them. In fact, I was chatting with them just the other day, the ones that I served with in my first deployment and the ones that I served with my second two deployments. And then my men, the best way that I can keep up with them, since there's so many of them, is through Facebook. And most of them are doing well. I have had a couple of guys that unfortunately took their own lives, but that's something else. And yeah, most of them are doing well. And after we pulled out and everything was hitting the news about Afghanistan falling immediately after us leaving, and the run on Bagram, on the, well, not on Bagram, but on HKIA, I tried to get in contact with as many people as I could and elicit as much feedback from those guys as I could about how they were feeling and what it felt like to have done what we did over there, and the people that we lost over there, to see that like immediately. Like it wasn't like in Vietnam where we pulled out and then it was, you know, slow degrade over time, and then eventually, you know, the South collapsed. But it was like we left and immediately just like
Right.
crumbled out from under our feet. Not
Nope.
the
Ben-
6 months
Ben-
to years that it thought it was.
Ben was there as a civilian on the day that the South collapsed. And do you want to describe
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, after I got out of the Army, I mentioned a while ago, I was I was heading up an NGO, and it was and I had also, you know, had many good friends, South Vietnamese soldiers, officers, whatever. And when I went back, I was back in the States for a while, and in the late fall of '74, I was getting all these reports that things were starting to go south in the war, and I wanted to flew back over there to check on what the status of everything was, and I could see clearly that the end was very near, and I didn't know if it was talking about weeks or months or a year. I didn't know, but I came back to the States, and I started making arrangements. I had a standby commercial passenger jet out. I think it was, I forget if it was in Oregon or Washington State, but I had that put on call. And then, of course, when everything did start to collapse, I flew back in and started pulling out all of our people from the NGO. And then I was traipsing through as much of the collapsing city of Saigon that I could to pull in all of my South Vietnamese comrades that and their families, and we loaded up that airplane, and we had a whole ton of kids because the NGO had to do with Amerasian children that had been fathered by Americans and then abandoned. And so we had this whole jet full of kids and military, and we were the last commercial flight to get off the runway at Tan Son Nhut. The plane behind us got hit, and so yeah, and it was a mad dash of about 2 or 3 days while I was there trying to gather up all of these folks. But it was heartbreaking because, of course, you can't get everybody. And I know you Afghanistan guys must know that feeling too, because it's I'm sure there's still people over there that y'all are trying to stay in contact with or get some help for.
Yeah, Ben, you were gathering up guys when you could hear the North Vietnamese artillery hitting the city. Isn't that correct?
Oh no, it was already starting to be in the city. I mean,
Yeah.
If you want to talk, I thought I knew chaos from my first couple of tours in Vietnam in combat, but I will tell you that the chaos of that collapsing city and the sheer panic and desperation and trying to deal with the North Vietnamese who were moving in very, 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 very quickly and overrunning everything. That was I think that was probably the most chaotic situation of my lifetime. And I know that when Afghanistan collapsed, it was kind of the same kind of chaos. And I'm sure that chaos is still floating around out there.
I have to say, Major, I really admire you for being in active touch with your men. That really is admirable. We came home, we couldn't find any place to belong. The VFW didn't want us. We actually had to form a Vietnam Veterans organization, Vietnam Veterans of America, for a place to belong for a long time. Now the VFW and the American Legions are like, please, please come to us. But it's like, hey guys, you had your chance to be nice. I've had some interesting reunions. I'll tell one that's one of my favorite, and that is, as my career progressed, I ultimately became a consultant to the top of General Motors. And in this role, I had access to all of these high-powered engineering cars that were not for sale to the public and were extremely fast. And so I had a meeting with the president of General Motors one day, and I'm late. I'm coming from Ann Arbor. I'm trying to get to Detroit, and I'm late, and I've got one of these cars, and I am moving. And eventually, an unmarked, actually older Chevy Impala falls in behind me, and I don't know who the hell this is. I mean, I'm going so fast. What's he doing going that fast in a car like that? Ultimately, I exit on West Grand Boulevard. He pulls next to me, hits the horn. I look over, 3 stripes, Detroit police sergeant. He goes, pull over, right? I go, no, we're not stopping where you say, we're stopping where I say. We're stopping over here. I get out of the car first. I would not advise us today. They're too jacked up, but you could do it back then. I get out of the car, hands where you can see him, meet him as he's getting out of the car, and I said, oh man, I'm so glad you're a police officer. And he said, yeah, I bet. I said, no, I thought you were some crazy guy, and I was going to have to shoot it out with you. He says, are you carrying? He draws his weapon. I said, no, I'm a Vietnam combat veteran, and I was going to get yours. He says, when were you there? I said, 1969. He says, I know you. I said, I know you. We had served together in the Mekong Delta, knew one another quite well. So I blew off the president's meeting. He blew off the ticket. We went and had pie and coffee. It was a reunion.
Very nice.
Yeah, unexpected. Pete, you have a long and kind of tough story about an Iraq. Is this an Iraq veteran?
Yes.
An Iraq veteran who has really had a hard time reintegrating. He served in what, 2010?
No, he was in the invasion. If you like, I can sort of make my contribution here. I'm loving hearing from all of you. Again, I enlisted in 1968, a few months after Tet, and chose a medical MOS because my father was a medical officer in Korea. His father ran an evacuation hospital in France in World War I and actually was involved in repatriating almost 200 American POWs. And history goes back from there. So, I felt like I was sort of joining the family. My dad's last advice was, with the twinkle in his eyes, in the Army, they say, never volunteer. And so, of course, I went and volunteered and repeatedly on my Form 20 put down Vietnam. That's where I wanted to go. And so, of course, they sent me to Thailand, where I was assigned to a Field Army Support Command, only we didn't have a Field Army, we had the Air Force. And what we did was really provided logistical and engineering transportation support for the Air Force. Then came back, Fort Sam, taught medical civic action at the Medical Field Service School, separated, and my wife and new baby came to Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor's my home, and enrolled at University of Michigan Law School.
Yeah, so Pete, you're now on screen. Can you see yourself?
I got it. Thank you. I looks I like the way I looked then better than the way I look now. So I like that. Uh, I want to say that I applied to the U of M Law School in 1967 and was accepted. And then I wrote them and said, well, I won't be joining the fall class. I'm in the Domestic Peace Corps, and when I'm done here, I'm joining the Army. I'll just apply again in 4 years. And by return mail, I get a letter back saying, when you come back, you're ours. All you have to do is send us a letter and we'll park you in the entering class. And for that, I am grateful. I practiced law in Ann Arbor for 30 years, had almost no contact with veterans. Ann Arbor was not a welcoming place for veterans or those who were associated with the Vietnam War. I don't mean that they were hostile, they were just indifferent, and they didn't understand anything about these experiences. And but once in a while I would get an opportunity to work with a family who, they were writing wills before the breadwinner went off to Iraq or Afghanistan. I could relate in that way. So that was my transition. That is becoming a lawyer, established, et cetera, family. The transition I really want to talk about is this. I got a call from the VA one day. I had a client who was a psychiatrist at the Ann Arbor VA, and she was treating a lot of men and women who were coming back with mental health issues associated with their experiences in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam. She said, I've got a young man here who we're treating for anxiety, inpatient right now. He's got a serious condition. He's probably going to get a PTSD diagnosis. We're trying to get him on disability. But right now, he's just sort of paralyzed. And he's got legal problems. He's going to be evicted from his apartment. He has student loans from before he joined the Army that are now in default. He has a credit card and they're threatening to sue him. He needs some legal advice. Could you just come over and spend an hour and talk to him and see if perhaps there's something you can do? And of course, as soon as I could find a parking space, I was there. He was very suspicious. His name is Marcus, and Lori will put his picture up in a minute.
There he is.
There we go. He was very suspicious of me, didn't know lawyers. Lawyers were pursuing him and so forth. But I said, I'm very interested in your military background. And he said, well, why is that? And I said, because I'm U.S. Army, 4th generation. And I deployed once in an unpopular war. And I'd like to know your story, and I'll tell you mine. So we talked, and as he's describing his duty stations before he deployed to Iraq, he said, I was in Thailand for a while. He said, I love that, was good duty. And I said, well, I was in Thailand 30 years ago. And he nearly jumps out of his chair and he said, where? Well, it turned out he served on the same base that I had served on in 1969, 1970. This is now, we're talking maybe 2006, okay, at the VA. And that became our bond. He trusted me from that moment. So I started working on his legal problems, which were manageable. And he started working on his treatment. And he was at the Mickham Clinic every day, and he did everything the VA needed him to do, and they took good care of him. But one of his real problems was social. He didn't have any friends. The landlord, who was going to evict him, I sort of jumped around a little bit here. I talked to the landlord, explained this young man is a veteran, And the landlord said, he's a veteran, he's at the VA. Landlord said, I'm Navy. I was Navy in Korea. He said, that young man will have an apartment in my place until he finds housing where he can be with his peers. So that's the way it worked. And he was relocated, Marcus was relocated to an apartment complex in Ypsilanti, populated by many, many young men and women with military experience and who were on disability and affiliated with the VA. So now he had a peer group. As is always the case, some of them were great friends and some of them took advantage of it. He's very, very lonely. And when his disability kicked in, people would want to borrow money from this and that and so forth. So I got appointed as conservator so we could protect him. But as he continued, we're talking over now years, he'd start to say, you know, I'd like to go to Wendy's. And I'd say, fine, I'll come over. So we go to Wendy's, but he can't go in. He's at the door, he's frozen. I can't go in. I'd never seen this before. So we leave. We go around, drive through, we get the food, we go back to his place and we have lunch. But over a period of time, he really wanted to do this, finally got in the door, but he had to sit in the back of the restaurant with his back to the wall. He had to be able to see out the windows. He wanted to see all the traffic, all the vehicles and everything coming in and out. And I have since met a lot of vets with that mindset. And it was a function of his experience in Iraq. Now, I haven't told you about his experience in Iraq. I need to do that now. He deployed with the third U.S. Army Division. You can see a little bit of his patch on his uniform. They were in the invasion. He was a radio man for his battalion. The battalion bivouacked overnight at an abandoned farm site, and these are old stone buildings and a stone perimeter wall and so forth. Seemed like a very good place. The Iraq Army was nowhere to be seen at that moment. During the night, they were hit by friendly fire, a missile attack from an American unit somewhere nearby. 7 guys in his unit died instantly. He did all he could as a radio man to summon help and help reorganize the unit, and then they pressed on. And but over the coming weeks and months, he found his concentration was failing. He couldn't sleep. He had nightmares, and his fitness for service militarily was declining. So at some point, he was rotated back to the United States, and he was up for reenlistment, and I realized he couldn't be the soldier he wanted to be. So he accepted an honorable discharge, and that's where his relationship with the VA began. Now,
Pete?
Yeah.
I'd like to just pause you for a second here, because these guys may have some comparable stories.
Yes, yeah, and I can
similar that
pick
you
up
wanna
on
talk
mine.
about? I don't mean to be opening wounds that we shouldn't open, so.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you.
I necessarily don't have a lot of friends who've suffered like that, but I know there's always this stigma with alcoholism with military veterans. And I know I've had some friends who've been out for probably, I would say, 6, 7, 8 years, and they still suffer from alcoholism, and I tried dearly to help them get out of it. But I think with my generation, that's definitely like the biggest struggle is alcoholism. Everybody just, because that's what we know in the Army. Unfortunately, you know, that's what we do. So that's probably where most of my friends struggle.
Yeah. No, Pete and I have visited all of the distilleries in Frankfort, Kentucky, but we're fortunate not to be overwhelmed by our hobby. But it's not actually a moral superiority. Some people, I'm one of them. I can have one and I don't need 2.
Exactly.
Other people that have 1, they need 10. It's just they can't help it.
They can't sleep without it.
Yeah, they can't sleep without it. So, all right.
I have a question. There's a question online, but I have one too.
Yeah.
Where do you guys think, I mean, and you don't know, so this is a little bit of asking like the future in a way, but looking at what you know of Vietnam and what you know of Afghanistan and your conflict, what do you think of this, the whole narrative? I mean, people are gonna ask, like, was it worth it? I mean, I know it's just weird to think about.
We got that asked today in the earlier panel.
And so, like, what, as you move through this, and we're a few months behind, this takes years, really, what are your thoughts on, like, your generation's progress on this, on kind of the aftermath of Afghanistan, like your personal aftermath, I think, of Afghanistan?
I think it was worth it, honestly. I mean, I think everybody had different reasons of joining, and I mean, we went there, we did our jobs, we did what we were told. Obviously, I was a private at the time, so I didn't know much of what was happening. I just did what I was told, but I definitely think it was worth it. Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack when you talk about whether or not what we did, the 20 years that America was at war, in Afghanistan, whether or not that was worth it. In my mind, and the way that I justify it with a couple of my peers that I went to West Point with, is we talk about why we went to Afghanistan in the first place, why we invaded it, and why we stayed there and tried to make it a stable country, and that was to prevent 9/11 from happening again. It's interesting that towards the end of my service, well, not the end because I'm still in the service, but before I came to Ann Arbor and U of M, we were getting privates in the Ranger Battalion that were born after 9/11. They had no concept of why we wanted to, why we were so not excited, but why we were so motivated to fight and win in Afghanistan and try to make it stable. And it was because, well, we saw when we were growing, when we were kids, we saw with our own eyes of what can happen when it's unstable, when it's allowed to be a breeding ground for international terrorism. And so I say all that to say this: we justified it, and I justified it in my mind, is that we were there for 20 years to prevent them from attacking American lives here. And in my mind, we achieved that. Whether or not we were able, if you read any article about it, you'll talk about how the American military can win the war. We can win the battle, but we're not very good at winning the peace. So we came in like a hammer and crushed everything that we could. Because when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And then, the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, we were all asked, okay, all right, well, make it like America. It's okay, I guess we'll try that, Obviously didn't work,
no
20 years later, but if you go down that rabbit hole of did we create a sustainable country there? Did we improve the lives of the Afghan people? You're gonna have some real tough, real dark conversations going down that road. And the way that me and my peers justified it was, we went there, and everyone can come up with their own reason on why we went there. And you might never really know the real reason, but the reason why I joined the Army was because of that I never wanted 9/11 to happen again.
Right.
And it was worth it to me because we prevented that for 20 years.
Oh yeah, 9/11 has not happened again.
And I'm sorry about it's not a question I would normally ask.
No.
I applaud that. I applaud that, but here's one thing I know. Well, like Peter, I'm an old lawyer too, and also a student of war and history and American history. And I do not think that this country, I'm not sure any country is really capable of nation building. This is a very capable country of prosecuting a war. And usually the prosecutions of war in this country are start out as noble causes. But if part of the mission of the military is to build a nation and especially build a nation in the image somehow of American democracy when you're dealing with cultures and religions and feuds that go back for thousands and thousands of years.
Yep.
It's an undoable task, impossible task.
Yeah, in some ways we were misled by our success with Germany after World War II and Japan after World War II, because there it worked. And, you know, they became, in fact, I remember a sketch on the old comedy show Laughing. I think you're all too young to remember what was the leading show in America, but they had a German dressed comedian and a Japanese dressed comedian peering through bushes, and the German guy says, we are the number one economic power in Europe, and the Japanese guy says, we're the number one economic power in Asia. And they look at the camera and they say, I wonder how the winners are doing. So it worked there, but it is tough to do. To me, from what I know, and I have to say my ignorance is encyclopedic, but what I know is Afghanistan isn't really a country. It's a fantasy of the British from about 1910, where they just got drunk one night, had a magic marker and drew a thing on a map. So it's all these different cultures and warring tribes. It's not a country. Now, if it wanted to be commercial, it could, because of the incredible natural resources it has.
Oh, yeah?
Rare metals, it has gas, it has coal. You know, it's got literally trillions of dollars of assets in natural materials that it could capitalize and commercialize. But whether or not it's going to, I don't know. Now, Vietnam, they did. Vietnam, as they started trading with us, that's exactly what they did. But they're natural capitalists. I have no idea what's going to happen over there. And I don't know how you guys could either at this stage. But the nation building seems like I agree with Ben, the nation building seems like what was the old expression in World War II, a bridge too far? You know, outcomes are defined. I've been a business consultant for 30 years, and one of the things I know is that outcomes are defined by structure. You know, if you have a bad structure, you can't have a good outcome. And you guys are clearly capable in so many different ways. I mean, your capability is just extraordinary. But it's not like this was a fair assignment from my perspective. Not that I have any right to judge it. I'm not judging it as a failure. I'm judging it as an impossible job.
That's tough.
Lori?
Yeah,
Lori, can I jump in for a minute?
sure.
Okay. Yeah, I agreeing with everything that's being said here. I'm going to limit my comments to Vietnam. I just as a footnote, I have two nephews who have done multiple combat tours in Afghanistan, one with the Marines and one with the U.S. Army. And I've not yet talked to them about their experiences. When they want to talk, I'll be all ears. But my sense that from my experience in an Asian country and the reading that I've done, the anthropology I studied in college, is that our approach in Vietnam was, to use a current term, not culturally competent. We didn't understand the culture of the people, and our efforts to militarize the civilian community as well as the strategic hamlets, for example, and manage the government, alienated the people. And so to the point that was one of you made quite rightly, it's like we were trying to make Vietnam America, and Vietnam wasn't America, and that had again just alienated and probably doomed the war, which was otherwise militarily, I think, substantially successful for us.
So, you guys, your thinking on this will evolve. I mean, it just does. I can say from my perspective, what I believed. I got back late '69 and was out of the Army in June of '70, and I had a whole evolution of thoughts. My first one was racial hatred. I hated them. I hated them because of what they had done to my friends. But 5 years later, and I've been reading a lot of history at that point, I realized that given all the power that we had in Vietnam, we were like Martians, the invasion of Mars. And they were like the people we would put in our movies about Mars invading, where the human spirit and creativity just overcame technology advantage. That this, in fact, in Vietnam was probably the most heroic defense of one's homeland of any time in history, up to that point anyway. And at that point, I started to think, well, I shouldn't be hating them, I should be respecting them. And when China invaded Vietnam, which they did after we left, they just kicked the Chinese ass. Chinese were just militarily devastated by this much smaller country. And you began to realize that the power of organization and imagination these people had. They say your greatness is defined by the greatness of your enemy. And in Vietnam, Jesus, what an enemy we had.
Yeah.
And I think, what an incredibly strong and resistant folks you guys were facing in Afghanistan, right? They weren't quitting. You had overwhelming power, particularly when you were fully deployed in a combat role. I mean, you had unbelievable power, but they didn't quit. As I understand it, they could hide in caves, then come back and more or less do sort of their version of what we were experiencing in Vietnam.
Yep.
Just, wow. Well, I don't know. Any additional points you guys would want to make, or do we have any questions? I think we had a couple of questions.
The question was, kind of going back to the beginning, what did you feel like when you first arrived in country? Like, what were your, and I'd probably had how did those things evolve from when you first stepped foot in country to when you left in country? What are differences? What thoughts of differences did you have?
So I was 18 at the time, and I was from a small town in Texas, so it was a huge culture shock for me. Like, honestly, like you get off the bus, or you get off the landing strip, and it just starts. Like, everybody's throwing bags everywhere. You're going to brief after brief after brief. You're what? I mean, you can probably speak. You're up for like 24, 48 hours, like just doing briefs and sleeping here and there, and then you go and you're doing left seat, right seat with the people who you're replacing. And they don't really care because they're just ready to go. And so it was a huge culture shock, and then you get used to it, and then you go, and then you're in the position of you're leaving, so you don't really, like, your mind's not there, you're just ready to go home. It was just a huge culture shock, but I would definitely made me who I am today.
Mm-hmm. Any other thought you want to build on that?
No, Seth makes great points.
Right.
When you get there as a young adult and you show up and you see the culture shock, you see what you have to do every day, and it takes a couple of weeks and you finally get the hang of it, and then you're like, all right, we can accomplish something, and by the end of your deployment, you're either excited about what you got done and you're ready to pass it off, or you're just sick of dealing with what you've been dealing with and you're ready to go home. So you get a lot of different, like I said, every deployment was different. First deployment, thought we got a lot done, and second deployment maybe less so, and then it ebbs and flows, but you get there and you're motivated, and then by the end you're just tired. And my hat's off to our World War II veterans, where they just went and they were just, you're there until you win. If they had said like, all right, we're going into Afghanistan, and you're there until there's a McDonald's or a Starbucks on every street corner, I don't know if we would have been able to get it done, or if it would have motivated us okay, we're gonna make this happen. But
I think you could have. I saw a memo in 1969 proposing to pull all of the U.S. forces back to the south end of the country and then march forward and pave it. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
We could have done that. We never had a direct, true frontal assault against the enemy. Lyndon Johnson was at his wit's end because, the war just couldn't go right for him or for the rest of us. So he went to see Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, and Ike looked at him and said, "For God's sakes, Lyndon, take Hanoi." But he never did, right? He never did. So we never had that frontal push they had when they landed in Normandy and broke through those hedges and pushed and, you know, bridged those rivers, and they were in Berlin the following December. Just nothing like that.
Yeah.
The just an entirely different experience. I will comment on my first day. I flew into, I think it was Cameron Bay. Does that sound right, Ben? Cameron Bay, would that be where I landed?
Cameron, it may have been Tonson for you. That's where I
Maybe
flew in.
Johnson, yeah. Anyway, the twilight was green, napalm was burning in the hills, and the damn airport was under mortar attack when we landed. This is 4 years after we've been in the country with massive force. The airport's not secure. We have to double time off the plane, low crawl through these bunkers while mortar rounds are going off, you know, big impact with a flat roof, and the light bulbs are shaking. And we're filling out Army forms, which had carbons in those days, so you have to press really hard. And we're trying to write these forms while this is going on. And then the mortar attack stops, and so now we're assembled, and it's explained to us that we're going to be flown down the next morning to a place we've never heard of called Dongtam. There's immediate relief because it's being overrun. And here are your M16s, here's your ammunition, here are your grenades, and now we're showing you the movie Barbarella with Jane Fonda. It's like, what? Insanity, complete insanity.
Yep.
So that, you know, now as an enlisted guy, I was sort of, you know, I was a private when I got there, probably a PFC, but, you know, same. I had some service before we went over. But I had no idea what, you know, the officer's perspective on this was. I just know that it's like, wait, I just got here, the airport's under attack. We're not defending this airport, we're going to this other place, and we're going to be in battle in the morning. I'm going to be dead before noon, you know. I won't even have had lunch. Right. Very, very disoriented. And Ben, how did you land in country?
Well, mine was sort of, I thought, really going to be harrowing, but turned out to be pretty funny. My unit that I went over to Vietnam with was about 20 people, and it was basically a chopper unit that was there to put me out into the jungles to do whatever I was doing while I was there. So we were in this huge C-141 with a couple of choppers on board and Jeeps and all of our gear, and we were all loaded. We were all armed to the teeth. And all the time that I had been in the Army before that, all the training that we had was by all these old veterans, all these old guys, not veterans, but guys that have been through these wars and come back, and they were teaching us. And it was made clear to us, it'll be a miracle if you make it off the tarmac wherever you land in Vietnam, because that's how bad it is. And, you know, look to your left and look to your right, somebody's going to get shot or killed. And so anyway, we fly into Tonson, and as we're coming down and we hit the runway, we're looking out the windows, and there's all these people in black pajamas squatting along the runway, and we're thinking, God, this is Viet Cong. We're gonna have to fight our way off the plane to the bunkers that were surrounding and so the first thing I noticed when the door opened was the blast of heat. And I can still feel that heat. The next thing I noticed was that these so-called Viet Cong that had gotten everybody stirred up in the airplane were all these old mamasans cutting grass on the side of the runway with scissors. And so we did not low crawl or run to the bunkers. We just took our time. And so that was my first few minutes in Vietnam. And yeah.
And Pete, you were flying into a fairly happy airport, right? I mean, Thailand.
Well, yeah, we were fortunate to get there, and I say that somewhat tongue in cheek. I flew by military charter from Travis to Honolulu, where we refueled, and then we refueled again at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. We arrived in the middle of a typhoon, and we're managed to refuel. We take off, we circle the city in this incredible storm, and then we set out for Asia. Somewhere over Vietnam, we hit a downdraft, what they now call wind shear. And we're looking out the window, and the weather was clear at that point. And the guys that could see out the window could see cannon flashes down below. And we just drop. And we're looking at one another like, hey, we're going to be dead before we ever hit the ground in Asia. And then the plane maneuvered, we had great pilots, out of the wind shear. We got to Bangkok Royal Thai Air Force Base, and I'll end my story here, but it's this impression you will all share. They opened the doors of the fuselage and were overwhelmed with the smell of human waste. And that was our introduction. The next day on the bus on my way up to my duty station, we came within 6 inches at 90 miles an hour of hitting a gasoline truck. So I guess I led a charmed life.
Very.
All's well that ends well. Well, Phil, we're sort of out of time. Should we wrap this up?
Yes, is there anything else?
Anything else you guys want to say? I'm so grateful.
Yeah, I
Oh,
I just got one thing.
Yeah.
One thing to say to the people in the audience and the panel, anyone watching online is the biggest thing that I could say to support veterans of your age and of my age is just to talk and listen and hear their stories. I know a lot of my peers and a lot of my men, they just want to talk about it, and that's one of the better things to just unpack what you're just storing up here, right? I have a great mentor when I was in the 2nd Ranger Battalion back out in Washington. Lieutenant Colonel retired Frank Adams and Major General retired J.B. Taylor. They ran a small every Saturday they meet at a Starbucks and just chat about military service, and they were both MACV advisors in Afghanistan or in Vietnam. And they have some very wild stories that they've shared with us about their experiences, and them asking us about our experiences and them telling us about their experiences. It makes a world of difference. So I would say if you know a veteran, just reach out and talk to them and ask them about how they feel. And if they don't want to talk, then like you said with your nephews, like eventually they will want to talk. You just have to be there to listen. And that's
great message.
all I want to say.
I'm going to close.
Lori,
What's that?
Lori, this is Pete. Because I was talking about a particular individual, if I could have 90 seconds, my story when we stopped is he can't even go into a restaurant. He's lonely and just fighting every day to work through his therapy. Things were successful. He made friends. He rediscovered a tremendous talent he had for art. He drew wonderful portraits, pencil portraits of people, photographic. He was able to enroll in community college and actually sit in a classroom with strangers. He was so good that within 3 weeks, the teacher made him a de facto teaching assistant, and he would show the other students. It gave him an enormous sense of self. And what he did with that, and I'll end with this, he would volunteer at the VA, who had healed him or helped to heal him. And he would draw portraits of old veterans who were dying and give those portraits to the veterans' families.
Wow.
It's beautiful.
What a guy. What a guy.
Yeah. Well, Pete, also you did quite a service there in helping him come back. I always remember the old John Lennon line, we get by with a little help from our friends.
Yes, we
And
do.
I think that's absolutely true.
Very true.
So thank you all for coming. Phil Larson, thank you for hosting this in the University of Michigan.
Thanks,
Just a
Phil.
terrific service. Tonight at Rackham Auditorium, we are having a show, Stories of Service. This will be our 6th annual. And we have veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam, because I'm going to be on stage tonight. And we have a 20-year Army veteran, master parachutist, 4 rows of ribbons, who went on to get 4 degrees in college and is now the Moth Radio Hour Story Slam winner. Hell of a guy. He's going to be emceeing and telling stories. So if you guys want any more vet talk, that'll be tonight at 7 o'clock at Rackham. In the meantime, I thank you all, and I thank you particularly much for your service. And wow, great stories.
And Daniel and Seth. Daniel and Seth.
Yep. Terrific, Ben. Thanks.
Thank,
Hey, Ben,
thank you, guys.
I'll follow up
Thank
with
you,
you
Ben.
later on.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
George. Thanks everybody
Take care.
for joining us.
Yep.